Hello, everybody. My name is Dash Curran, and welcome to my presentation on NieR Replicant. In NieR Replicant, the interplay of narrative, interpolation, and choice creates a complex web of moral ambiguity, challenging players to consider the ethical dimensions of their actions within a deeply engaging story. The game teaches us that moral truths are not universal, but are shaped by context and perspective. Yoko Taro. Yoko Taro was the creative director for NieR Replicant. He emphasizes his approach to narrative via backward script writing. He often begins crafting his game's narrative by first conceptualizing the ending. This allows him to envision the final emotional impact the game will have on the player. For Taro, the game is not important. The game is a vehicle by which a message can be transmitted to the player. His goal is not the creation of the game. It is instead the emotional stir that it causes in the player's brain. After creating and formulating the ending sequence, he works backward to construct the story and determine what events will lead to the conclusion. In doing this, he is able to fill the game's narrative with reasons why the player should feel emotionally connected to the final message. In NieR Replicant, this backward script writing approach is evident in how the narrative layers unravel. Players may only fully comprehend the significance of their actions and the game's events after reaching the conclusion and reflecting on the journey. Yoko Taro is also known for making players deeply connect with the characters in his games, which is extremely apparent within NieR. By using his writing process, he knows, for example, when a character will die or be removed from the narrative before fully imagining their background. He can then fill in the background with moments or events that will make the player deeply connect with them and ultimately impact the player significantly when they are separated from the story. Narrative. Narrative in video games refers to the way a story is told within the game. It includes plot, characters, dialogue, and the world in which the game is set. As stated in Barry Ibb's piece, Narrative Structures in Computer and Video Games, narrative can be used to create a sense of moral ambiguity and complexity, to challenge players to consider the ethical dimensions of their actions within the game's story, and to shape the player's perception of the game world and its inhabitants. In NieR Replicant, the narrative intricately does just that. The game invites players into a post-apocalyptic setting where the lines between right and wrong are constantly blurred. The gameplay is set in a desolate but aesthetically pleasing world ravaged by disease and despair. The player steps into the shoes of the protagonist, who is never officially named. Still, many refer to him as NieR, whose only mission is to find a cure for his sister Yona, who suffers from a deadly illness. The story of NieR Replicant is revealed in fragments, with each playthrough offering new perspectives and covering hidden layers of the world. Initially, the player experiences the world through NieR's eyes, empathizing with his quest to save Yona and perceiving his enemies, like the ominous Shadow Lord, as straightforward antagonists. Ip writes, narrative can be used to create a sense of empathy and identification with the protagonist. However, subsequent playthroughs unravel the complexity of the antagonists, revealing their motivations and painting a picture where the boundaries between heroes and villains becomes increasingly ambiguous. Yoko Taro was inspired to build a story after the tragic events of 9/11, when he realized the terrorists who committed the attack thought they were doing the right thing all along. Taro quotes, "You don't have to be insane to kill someone, you just have to think you're right." And he built the story of NieR Replicant around this theme. A great example of this narrative complexity is the story of Devila and Popola, twins who initially appear as allies to NieR. As the story unfolds, it's revealed that they are in charge of protecting mankind from ceasing to exist, and what NieR is doing is directly opposing their goals. Their eventual confrontation with NieR is an unavoidable culmination of duty and loyalty, challenging the player's notions of right and wrong. This plot development, as noted in the GameSpot review, is a manifestation of Taro's ability to toy with player expectations, leading them through a narrative that continually challenges and reshapes their understandings of right and wrong, reflecting the real-world complexity of moral righteousness. Another example of this, highlighted by YouTube user Ratatosker and pictured as the top image, is when Emil, an ally of NieR's, loses control of his power and blows up an entire village, killing everyone within it. Distraught about what he has done, Emil looks for consolation with NieR. As Ratatosker explains, NieR doesn't try to console him by telling him it's not his fault or that there's nothing he could have done. In essence, he tells him, yes, you did kill all those people, but you saved us, and that matters more. Don't look back. Choice. Choice in video games refers to the decisions players make that can influence the game's narrative, characters, outcomes, or gameplay. Sacrifice is a recurring theme in NieR Replicant, woven deeply into its narrative fabric. Characters are frequently faced with devastating choices where the cost of their actions reverberates beyond their own lives. NieR's journey to save his sister is fraught with sacrifices impacting him and the world around him. The theme of sacrifice is most powerfully depicted in the game's ending D. In this ending, the player faces a choice, pictured on the right, that transcends the game's narrative. To save Kaine, a close ally, at the cost of erasing NieR's existence from the world, including from the player's memory and game data. This act of self-sacrifice is profound, as it requires the player to give up their attachment to the character and the journey, effectively sacrificing their own experience for the sake of a virtual character's salvation. This ending is a groundbreaking moment in video game storytelling, as it breaks the fourth wall and directly involves the player in its moral dilemma. It reflects on the assertion that moral truths are not universal, but are shaped by context and perspective, by making the player's individual experience and emotional connection a crucial part of the equation. Moral decision-making is also a theme in some of the side quests within the game. For example, there is a side quest named The Lighthouse Lady's Wrath. In this quest, players deliver mail to an elderly woman who tends the lighthouse in Seafront. It's revealed that the letters are from her long-lost lover. However, a twist emerges when players discover that the lover has passed away and that the townspeople have been writing letters to keep her spirits up. The player then faces a moral choice pictured on the bottom left: reveal the truth to the lighthouse lady or continue the lie to maintain her happiness. Interpellation. In video games, interpellation refers to how a game draws players into its narrative, shaping their perspective and role within the game world. In NieR Replicant, the technique of interpellation is used incredibly well to immerse players in a story that constantly challenges and redefines their understanding of its characters. Throughout the game, players believe they control the NieR that appears in the prologue. This character is seen desperately trying to protect his sister in a dystopic setting that appears to be a near future Earth. This initial setup interpolates the player into a straightforward narrative of a brother's love and sacrifice. However, as the story unfolds, it is revealed that the player is not controlling the same NieR from the prologue, but rather his gestalt, an android copy of him that gained consciousness on its own. The original NieR, now known as the game's main antagonist, the Shadow Lord, has been seeking to reunite with his own sister, Yona. This reveal fundamentally shifts the player's understanding of the game's narrative and their role within it. This shift challenges the player to reconsider their actions throughout the game. The enemies they have been fighting are revealed to have their own valid reasons and motivations, mirroring the player's own. An example of this is shown below, when two enemies are defeated and their wholesome relationship that you disrupted is revealed. This realization complicates the moral landscape of the game, as players must grapple with the fact that their quest, which they believe to be righteous, has caused suffering to others with equally legitimate reasons. Paratextual document. An article on Goomba Stomp magazine by Renan Fontes titled NieR Replicant Ending Analysis and Critique relates closely to my argument about NieR Replicant, especially concerning the narrative choice and moral ambiguity in the game. The article discusses how the game's multiple endings, especially subsequent routes after the game's main ending, add depth to the story and characters, recontextualizing the Shadow Lord from a basic villain to a tragic figure, thereby challenging the traditional hero-villain dichotomy and inviting players to see the other side of the story. The article details the narrative structure of NieR Replicant, discussing how the game's plot and character development, including the shifting perceptions of the Shadow Lord, create a complex and morally ambiguous world. Fontes writes, "The point of Route B is to make audiences understand that there's another side to every story, while subverting gaming's tendency to portray the protagonist as wholly good and the villains wholly bad." The endings of NieR Replicant, particularly endings C, D, and E, are also explored by Fuentes. These endings highlight the theme of sacrifice and the moral decisions players must make, such as erasing NieR's existence for Kaine's salvation, directly involving the player in the game's moral dilemma. Visual representation. Here is a visual representation of my argument. This image was generated by Bing's image creator and relates to choice, narrative, and interpolation within NieR Replicant. In the game, players are immersed in a complex narrative where the lines between hero and villain are blurred, and moral choices are far from black and white. The telescope symbolizes the interpolation here, an instrument that brings distant objects into focus, just as the game draws players into its own world, aligning them with the protagonist's perspective. The telescope becomes a lens through which players view and interpret the game's world, filtering their understanding through NieR's experiences and moral compass, and not the enemies themselves. The figure NieR gazes at through the telescope could be seen as a metaphor for the Shadow Lord. The duality of the antagonist being a mirror and dark counterpart to NieR underscores the theme of choice central to the game's narrative. Players are faced with decisions that affect the course of their story, often challenging their ethics and forcing them to consider the consequences of their actions on the game's world and its inhabitants. The player's decision to align themselves with one moral code over another, or to recognize the shades of gray in between, shapes the game's journey. The round frame of the telescope and the window in the image serve as metaphors for the multiple endings in NieR Replicant, allowing players to circle back through the game's narrative. Much like the round lens of the telescope that offers a focused view, each new playthrough provides a fresh perspective on the game's events. With each loop, the narrative expands, revealing new layers and hidden depths, much as the view through a telescope brings previously unseen stars into the observer's field of vision. This circular motif symbolizes the never-ending quest for understanding in a world where every end leads to a new beginning. Thank you for watching. Here are my sources.